Welcome to The Explainer. I want you to jump right in and take a quick mental journey with me. Just close your eyes for a second and imagine taking the massive modern-day global reality of the Islamic world and throwing it in reverse. We're traveling back, way back, like 1,400 years back in time. Watch the modern skylines disappear, the sprawling metropolises just vanish, until literally all that's left is a small, ancient city of stone and sand tucked into a harsh desert valley. Imagine the sound of the desert wind, and above this city sits a mountain. On that mountain, a single cave. Today, we're diving into how one of the absolutely most consequential forces in the history of human civilization began in that exact isolated spot.
But first, to put things into perspective, let's grasp the sheer scale of what we're actually talking about here. 1.8 billion. That is the number of Muslims worldwide right now, spread across literally every single continent. We're looking at a civilization with millions of mosques, stretching all the way from Morocco to Malaysia. It's a culture that historically gave us algebra, early algorithms, modern hospitals, universities, and the astronomical observations that really laid the groundwork for modern science. When historians look at Islam, regardless of their own personal beliefs or backgrounds, they universally recognize it as a massive, world-shaping force. But, here is the absolute most fascinating part.
That whole massive global civilization, every mosque, every memorized Quran, every scientific contribution we just mentioned, it all traces its origins back to one singular, precise moment. One man, one cave, one night, and just one word, read, or in Arabic, iqra. This all went down in the year 610 CE. So in this explainer, we're going back to that exact moment. We're going to understand the world Islam was born into, the people who were there, and the night that changed human history forever.
Section 1. The Pre-Islamic World. The Age of Ignorance.
Okay, so to truly understand the dawn of this faith, we got to look at the soil it grew in, right? In the 6th century, Arabia was effectively completely off the geopolitical grid. To the north, you had the mighty Byzantine Empire, deeply rooted in Christianity, operating with massive centralized authority. To the northeast, the Sassanid Empire, practicing Zoroastrianism, also functioning as a massive superpower. But Arabia, totally different story. It was wildly fragmented, absolutely no central government, no unified law, no overarching state authority whatsoever. It existed in a period scholars call al-Jahiliyyah, which is often translated as the Age of Ignorance. Now, don't get me wrong, they weren't ignorant when it came to things like poetry or memory. They were actually incredibly sophisticated there, but they were in a state of really deep moral and spiritual loss.
And on the ground, that moral loss was pretty brutal. Without a central government, your tribe was literally everything. Absolute loyalty to your tribe wasn't just some cultural norm, it was the only way you survived the lawless deserts. But, as you can guess, this meant blood feuds between tribes could, and did, last for generations. A single dispute could spark an all-out war. On top of that, slavery was endemic and totally unregulated. And, among certain tribes, the absolutely horrific practice of female infanticide was common, where the birth of a daughter was treated as a source of deep shame. Spiritually, the Kaaba in Mecca, which was originally built by Abraham as a house of pure monotheism, had been filled with 360 idols. It was, quite simply, a society that had completely lost its way.
Section 2. The Trustworthy Orphan. A Life Shaped by Loss.
So, zooming in from that macro-Arabian landscape straight into Mecca, we find a life profoundly defined by loss. Muhammad was born in 570 CE, a famous year in Arabia known as the Year of the Elephant. But his father actually died before he took his very first breath. He was born entirely fatherless. Then, at just 6 years old, his mother, Amina, passes away during a journey. After that, he's taken in by his grandfather, who was this incredibly powerful and loving figure, but he also dies when Muhammad is just 8. From there, he falls under the protection of his uncle, Abu Talib. When you track this early life, what you really see is a boy who experienced extreme vulnerability, in a society where having strong male figures and tribal backing was literally the only currency that mattered.
Yet, despite growing up as an orphan in this brutal Jahiliyyah society, something truly remarkable happens. He earns the title Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. And what you have to remember here is that this wasn't some religious title handed down by a priesthood. No, this was a totally organic title given to him by the ordinary, everyday people of Mecca. As he grew into adulthood, they just noticed he was different. He absolutely refused to participate in the excesses, the heavy drinking, the idolatry of his peers. His word was utterly reliable. His character was so remarkably consistent that his community literally defined him by his trustworthiness, long before he ever claimed any sort of prophethood.
Section 3. The First Believer, an extraordinary partnership.
You really cannot fully understand the dawn of Islam without understanding this incredible dynamic. Think of them as basically a 6th century power couple. On one side, you have Khadija. She is a 40-year-old widow living in a deeply patriarchal merchant society, yet she is this highly successful, fiercely independent business owner. She commands immense respect. On the other side, you have Muhammad. He's 25, of pretty modest financial means, but carrying that extraordinary reputation as Al-Amin. Khadija actually hires him to manage her trade caravans to Syria, and he ends up returning double the expected profit while exhibiting just incredible character. Based entirely on who he was as a person, she proposes to him. What follows is a 25-year marriage of absolute fidelity, mutual respect, and a seriously deep partnership.
Now fast forward 15 years into their marriage. When Muhammad experiences the first and incredibly terrifying moments of revelation, he doesn't run to his uncle. He doesn't go to a community leader. He runs straight home to Khadija, literally trembling, terrified for his own sanity. And she doesn't hesitate for a second. She says these exact words, "By Allah, he will never disgrace you. You maintain family ties. You help those who cannot help themselves. Never will Allah disgrace you." She knew his character perfectly, and because of that deep knowing, she became the absolute first person to believe in his message. Khadija is, without a doubt, the very first Muslim.
Section 4. The Night of Revelation. The Search for Truth.
All right, we are now zooming into the absolute micro level. As Muhammad approached the age of 40, he started retreating to this solitary place called the Cave of Hira on the Mountain of Light, just seeking spiritual truth away from all the idolatry of Mecca. It's the month of Ramadan in 610 CE. According to Islamic tradition, the angel Jibril, or Gabriel, suddenly appears, out of nowhere. He commands Muhammad, "Iqra, read." Muhammad, who is unlettered, replies, "I am not a reader." What happens next is this moment of immense, almost earth-shattering physical tension. The angel embraces him with an overwhelming, unbearable pressure and then releases him. This happens 3 times. "Read." "I cannot read." The pressure, the release. It's described as a profound, physical breaking open of reality itself.
And then, following that third intense release, the very first words of the Quran are spoken. "Read, in the name of your Lord who created." These are the opening verses of what would become Surah Al-Alaq. According to the historical record, these words were instantly and permanently embedded into his heart. The long search was over. The revelation had officially begun.
Section 5. An unfinished story. The first followers.
So how exactly does a totally solitary experience in a dark cave become a massive public movement? Well, the message was actually kept private for the first 3 years, and it's super fascinating to see exactly who made up the nucleus of this new faith. You have Khadija, his wife; Ali, his young cousin who literally grew up in his household; Zayd, a freed slave who was effectively his adopted son; and Abu Bakr, his closest, oldest friend. Do you see the pattern here? The people who knew Muhammad the most intimately, the ones who saw him behind closed doors, who knew his everyday habits and flaws, they were the very first to believe him without a single second of hesitation. That intimate, rock-solid trust formed the absolute foundation of the early Muslim community.
Of course, eventually the mission had to go public, and when Muhammad stood on Mount Safa and openly declared this monotheistic message, the Quraysh, which was the ruling tribe of Mecca, and get this, even included his own uncle Abu Lahab, they fiercely opposed him. Why? Well, it's a simple logical chain reaction. Think about it. If there's only one God, those 360 idols in the Kaaba are completely invalid. If the idols are invalid, the massive, super lucrative annual pilgrimage to Mecca stops. And if the pilgrimage stops, the entire political and economic dominance of the Quraysh over Arabia crumbles. From their perspective, this wasn't just some new theology. This was a direct, absolute threat to their wealth, their power, and their entire social order. And so, the fierce persecution began.
We've seen the history, we've walked through the timelines, and we've talked about the politics. But let's take a step back for a second. What am I? Why am I here? What happens when I die? These are the universal, deeply human questions that drove a 40-year-old merchant up a mountain to sit in a dark cave 1,400 years ago. He was searching for the truth of our existence. And the answers that emerged from that cave that night didn't just stay stuck in the 6th century. They are quite literally still echoing in the hearts of billions of people today. So I'll leave you to think about this. In a world that is still desperately searching for meaning, how might the events of that single night in the Cave of Hira still be answering the deepest questions we ask ourselves today? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.